All right, today we do some JBP. Now, I should first admit that I'm not a huge fan of this book. And I have shared some criticisms already in written form, particularly when it comes to Peterson's views on parenting. But today we're going to share an excerpt related to therapy, which I think is actually very good. And we're going to use it as sort of a starting point to have a wider conversation about what therapy is and isn't as well. And so let me first read this brief excerpt and then we'll talk about it, go from there. So Peterson writes, "Psychotherapy is not advice. Advice is what you get when the person you're talking with about something horrible and complicated wishes you would just shut up and go away. Advice is what you get when the person you are talking to wants to revel in the superiority of his or her own intelligence. If you weren't so stupid, after all, you wouldn't have your stupid problems. Psychotherapy is genuine conversation. Genuine conversation is exploration, articulation, and strategizing. When you're involved in a genuine conversation, you're listening and talking, but mostly listening. Listening is paying attention. It's amazing what people will tell you if you listen. Sometimes if you listen to people, they will even tell you what's wrong with them. Sometimes they will even tell you how they plan to fix it. Sometimes that helps you fix something wrong with yourself." All right. So that's Peterson's view on therapy. And I think it's a great summary. And, it's perhaps somewhat disheartening that there have been many attempts to repeat this basic reality when it comes to therapy, that it is not merely advice. And I would argue it's not advice at all. It's rarely if ever advice. There's some nuance here in that, there's perhaps some therapists, maybe you could cite someone like Irving Yalom, that he is inclined to give suggestions at some point, and you can make a case for that. But as a general rule, therapy should not be thought of as something as akin to advice. And the reason for that is fundamentally, in addition to what Peterson has described, that if advice was sufficient to resolve issues within and between human beings, then psychotherapy wouldn't really have any role or wouldn't really have any reason to exist. And the reason therapy exists is because there exists a class of people for which advice doesn't work. If it did, that would be great, and we wouldn't have to go through this complex process of therapy in the first place. But whether you like it or not, it is just an observable fact that giving people advice does not facilitate the kind of change that you want to see or that they often want to see either. For most people, if you just tell them, get enough sleep, move your body on a regular basis, get some exercise, whether it's the gym or sports, develop a community of people that you care about and that care about you, find a purpose, and perhaps don't listen to Radiohead. If you're to apply those things, you're probably going to be doing all right. The issue, though, is that even if we can all be in a general agreement that those things are good things to do, perhaps for some of you, not the Radiohead one, but the others, the issue is that people don't do that. even if there's an awareness that it will be beneficial to them to do, they don't do it. So the question is why? And that ultimately is one of the reasons why therapy is the thing. It is to reconcile why there is a disparity between what people want, claim they want, and what they do, and what their actions produce. And figuring out why there's this disparity is part of the therapeutic process. So maybe just to reiterate once more in a more holistic way, I would say that the way I often articulate foundationally what therapy is that, and we can get into more this point more later, but fundamentally therapy is a relationship designed to facilitate a particular kind of conversation aimed at unearthing unconscious motivations you may have that govern your thoughts and your behavior, some of which you don't like and that you wish to change, and that you believe, and that we believe or agree that they are possible to change. And that through the conversation, we can gain an awareness of what some of those things are, which ultimately expands a range of choice and ultimately affords us a greater degree of freedom. Now, what we do with that greater range of choice is subjective. We can explore the trade-offs on the uncertainties you may have when it comes to one decision versus another. But as a general rule, a therapist does not impose his set of values on you. So that's the basic process. Now, what I've just said at the end there leads us to another key point about therapy, perhaps, which is that it attempts to be somewhat value neutral, in that it doesn't presume that there's necessarily a correct way to live. Now, there's some nuance here, and this is where it gets kind of murky, because I think it would be naive to assume that there are no ethical presuppositions in therapy, and that therapists are neutral themselves, which they're not. No one is neutral. We attempt to be neutral, but we do it imperfectly because we're human beings, just like you. So we do our best to not let our own subjective preferences interfere with your own exploration, but again, we're fallible just like you. Now, even having said that, there's still arguably some values baked into therapy, because generally, something else that therapy is that it is a means of increasing your own personal agency as an individual. And so you could argue that it does have a bias towards individualism as opposed to a collective way of looking at the world, whereby perhaps, and this is just the case in some cultures, where the group outweighs the individual, and that the individual is often sacrificed for the benefit of the group. And this can create a lot of difficulties in therapy when, if you're working with someone that comes from a collectivist background, and they value that, they like being part of a group, and they like that they think about other people and they prioritize other people. But then you're putting them in this situation in therapy where they're kind of being implicitly asked to be selfish and self-interested in a way that they're not used to. And again, to just overlook that value discrepancy as if that's just the way you should think about things as an individual, is, again, you're confessing your own bias by doing that, which again appears to be baked in to the therapeutic process. So that's just something to be aware of, that it does tend to be a bit more individualistic, because it is designed to increase your own personal agency so that you're better able to function in the world as an individual. And because of that, we can also say that, in a way, the goal of a therapist is to get you to fire them. Because, and this circles back to the challenge around why we don't give advice, is that if I give you advice, even if it's good advice and you apply it and it works and you're happy with the result, the danger is that although I may have produced a nice outcome for you, I have acted against this other principle of increasing your own personal agency. Because if you come to rely on me for advice, then you're becoming potentially more dependent, which is not really what we want. If I want you to ultimately fire me someday, then hopefully we're nudging you towards greater independence and a greater confidence that you're able to resolve your own problems without me or without a therapist. So if you keep giving someone advice, even if it works, or arguably even more so if it works, you're creating this dependency that is keeping someone potentially stuck and further away from that ideal of someone that is an independent adult that can resolve their own issues and has enough tools and is equipped and confident in their ability to face new challenges. So I think that's maybe a good summary in terms of some things that therapy is and some of the things that therapy isn't. And again, I appreciate Peterson's comments, and he has a great way of putting it, and hopefully I've added a little bit more clarity in terms of what therapy is and what it isn't. Thanks.